Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast. I'm Tom Quigley, your host. This week, the SPaMCAST 774 is a re-release of SPaMCAST 436. We are on our annual holiday and we'll be back with new programs on October 22nd. For the next 4 weeks, we'll feature shows from the archives. Today, SPaMCAST 436, Incrementalism, UAT and Agile, Systems Thinking. This is an essay, a conversation with Jeremy Barrio, and a conversation with Jon M Quigley. The SPaMCAST 436 was originally aired on April 3rd, 2017. I hope you enjoy today's show. And in today's Software Process and Measurement Cast, we feature our essay titled Change Fatigue, Tunnel Vision, and Watts Humphrey, in which we answer the question of whether the state and culture of an organization or team can have a large impact on whether a Big Bang approach or incremental approach makes sense to change. Our second column is from Jeremy Barrio. Jeremy discusses user acceptance testing in Agile. There are lots of different ways to accomplish user acceptance testing in Agile. In an Agile environment, the only wrong way is not to do UAT and Agile. We have a link to Jeremy's blog in the show notes. Anchoring the cast this week, Jon M Quigley brings his column, The Alpha and Omega of Product Development, to the cast. This week, Jon puts all the pieces together and discusses system thinking. One of the places you can find Jon is at Value Transformation LLC. Link in the show notes. Change Fatigue, Tunnel Vision, and Watts Humphrey. I recently spent a week in Mumbai. While stuck in traffic during a tour of some of the incredible sites, our guide stated that in Mumbai there were 3 certainties: death, taxes, and traffic. With the sound of auto and truck horns ringing in my ear, the statement rang true. On reflection, I would add change to the list of certainties, whether in Mumbai or as a general attribute of human endeavors. Software development and maintenance are no different. In several recent blog entries, we've extolled and then pilloried the virtues of both Big Bang and incremental change approaches, and by inference, everything else in between. In the end, there is no perfect approach that fits all scenarios. How can we decide which end of the change approach spectrum will work in any given scenario? The answer is not as straightforward as a checklist or a decision tree. Rather, 3 interrelated concepts must be weighed when deciding on a change approach. The 3 are organizational propensity to fall prey to change fatigue, the possibility of tunnel vision, and the tolerance for dealing with Watts Humphrey's requirement uncertainty principle. Change fatigue occurs when the combination of a high-paced change and negative perception of value or success of change collide. One of the mantras of the software development industry is that the pace of technological change is fast and getting faster. One form of evidence of the pace of change is that nearly every person has to reinvent themselves at least once and often many times. This constant change churn sets the stage for the propensity for change fatigue to pop up at any moment if they feel they're working towards change they don't see as successful or valuable, either to themselves directly or to their organization. In organizations with this smoldering change fatigue lurking below the surface, slowing down the rate of change by consolidating smaller and more incremental changes might be a useful strategy. Tunnel vision is a singular focus on one thing to the absolute exclusion of everything else. In medical terms, tunnel vision is not considered a positive. In the business and IT environment, the medical definition is often confused with the more sought-after concept of focus. While it is easy to see a relationship, they are not the same. When focus crosses the line and causes an organization to neglect or ignore other important priorities, focus becomes as destructive as tunnel vision. One of the attributes of a Big Bang change program is that it is often too big to fail. When an organization develops tunnel vision and begins to ignore feedback, they've entered the danger zone. An organizational culture can be a powerful tool to predict whether tunnel vision is a major risk. Organizations that have an extreme fear of failure or pride themselves for persevering at all odds are apt to fall prey to tunnel vision. Early in my career, I worked for a firm that proudly stated that if any of their projects got into trouble, they would darken the skies with engineers. This almost always busted the budget and was career limiting. The two competing cultural components tend to cause leaders to block out negative feedback. The culture fostered tunnel vision. In those cases, having a focus became tunnel vision. Managers and stakeholders put blinders on and ignored feedback until it was too late to correct the course. If an organization is at higher risk for tunnel vision due to its culture, incremental change approaches are a tool to create a mechanism to challenge the vision and generate and interpret feedback. Watts Humphrey, the founder of the Software Engineering Institute and contributor of some of the most significant thought leadership to software development over his lifetime, established the principle of requirements uncertainty. In its very simplest form, the principle can be stated as they won't completely know it until they see it. The amount of uncertainty establishes how far into the future a project team or organization will comfortably commit to a direction. The more the uncertainty, the shorter the amount of time into the future a team can commit. This requirement uncertainty principle screams incrementalism. As Todd Field suggested, a short commitment cycle does not preclude a longer-term vision. Several frameworks for scaling Agile build this risk mitigation cycle into their methods. For example, the Scaled Agile Framework Enterprise, SAFe, is built around a process that recognizes uncertainty. SAFe includes a long-term roadmap for each product. The roadmap becomes less specific the further it extends into the future, reflecting uncertainty. Specific program increments, PIs, define what will be delivered over a 90-day-ish window, reflecting more certainty that comes from a short fixed time horizon. In a further attempt to reduce uncertainty, the PI evolves based on the feedback and results from short sprints or iterations. SAFe represents a hybrid approach that mixes the Big Bang and incremental concepts. The process provides organizations a way to define what they intend to deliver in the future while accepting that real life creates situations that need to be addressed. The more uncertainty a change program faces, the shorter the increment of commitment should be. The state and culture of an organization or team has or can have a large impact on whether a Big Bang approach. The state and culture of an organization or team has or can have a large impact on whether a Big Bang approach or incremental approach makes sense. I think the most succinct answer I got when I asked which change approach made the most sense was from Lee Copeland, talent scout at TechWell. Lee answered with one word: depends. Thoughts, comments, all welcome. Please feel free to reach out to us at the Software Process and Measurement Cast at spamcastinfo@gmail.com. Call us on the cell if you like, 1-440-668-5717. Record a message on your cell phone and send that to spamcastinfo@gmail.com. Tell others about the podcast. Tell others about other podcasts that you listen to. We look forward to the conversation. Jeremy Barrio, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast. Jeremy, I really look forward to your QA Corner every month. Jeremy, today, can you talk to me about how UAT and Agile work together.
Yeah, well, UAT, my feeling, UAT is just a different form of testing outside of functional, non-functional, load type testing. I see it more as maybe like a precursor to doing a demo at the end of the agile sprint, where you're kind of demoing to the product, demoing to the product owners or to clients. I see it's just a different form. It allows maybe even having a product owner come in and use the workflows that they know the clients use the product for to try and do stuff.
Just because not everyone has, the background in testing that I have and you have, can you explain to somebody who might be a newbie or might never have heard of UAT, user acceptance testing, what that is and why should we care about it to begin with?
So in the broadest sense of user acceptance testing is basically as the term implies, is it's the user accepting the software or the change coming in. The way I see it is we don't actually have our physical clients, like for us, we don't have our physical clients come in and test the software before it goes out into production. But we do have like our product owners who are very, very knowledgeable of what the client does from a workflow perspective, and that they can come in and use the software as a client potentially would use it to ensure that, one, the changes that they expected to come in are there, that they got what they want to see. Also, maybe that some of the kind of maybe intricacies of certain workflows that the QA team does not do particularly, or maybe it's just like we have one client that does one certain workflow that is a little bit different than everyone else, just to make sure that that one workflow isn't impacted by the changes coming in.
So in Agile, we have a product owner that's actively involved with the team on a day-to-day basis, looking over people's shoulders, looking at something before we even get to the demo. Why do we still have to do user acceptance testing?
Well, it's just the form of what I think it's just what they do. Like they're going to be the product owner coming in and looking over people's shoulders, kind of keeping track. That's just a different form of testing. To me, it's more of a static type test, not a dynamic test, so to speak. Like they're kind of making sure that everything is working just fine. So that can be considered UAT. Like UAT does not have to be a specific phase within the testing process. It could be done all the way through. So I think in Agile, where you have that product owner that's very engaged and understands everything that's happening and knows what is going on within the sprints and how things are being tested and looked at, to me, that's UAT. Like it's just, instead of like say taking the last day of a sprint and turning that into a UAT phase day or something like that, the entire sprint could be considered UAT because they're going to know what's going to happen. They have that understanding. They see the information being passed back and forth. They're part of the feedback loop. So that's just a different way of seeing how UAT is. I think it's we have to kind of broaden our, take a step back and say, okay, like, yeah, there's UAT, there's functional testing, there's non-functional testing. Those are specific phases as they go through in different parts of software delivery. But I think we kind of maybe take a step back and say, okay, let's maybe blur the lines a little bit or broaden the phases and definitions a bit so that we can sit there and say, oh, for Agile, we have a product owner that is there from beginning to finish. They know what is there at the beginning, they know what's there at the end, and they agree with it at the end of the sprint. So to me, that's UAT.
How formal then does UAT have to be? Do I need to have expected results, sign-offs, or is that driven more by context as to whether or not it has to be really formal?
Maybe not like formal from a sign-off perspective, because even within the sprints, I guess it's determined by like what your definition of done is. The results, within the functional testing and with the non-functional under my team, we store results. I mean, we have to store results to show that we got what we expected. But we have the acceptance criteria. The product owners give us the acceptance criteria. Okay, this is what we expect to happen with this change. So if for UAT, if they've seen the results within the functional testing and they've seen the results just going through their demo or even through a quick pre-demo, so to speak, at the end of the sprint, them doing that, then there's kind of turn around saying, yep, this is good, or no, this isn't what I expect. We have to make more changes. So I think it's usually that scenario could be considered your sign off, is where they turn around and say, yep, we're good to go, put it out, or no, we need to make some small changes here and there.
Can you ever see a reason not to do any form of user acceptance testing?
No. User or whoever is the representative of the end users has to at least see the software before it goes out into production, internal to the organization, or an external kind of representative to come in, just so they can preview and make sure it's what they expect, or that they don't have any surprises, as we had our last discussion on. We want to make sure that the client knows what's coming out, right? We want to make sure that, so if it's an internal client or internal representative, they have to make sure that they write their release notes when it goes out to clients, saying, okay, here's release number 5.0.20, and here's all that's in it. Here's we fixed this, we included this enhancement, we now have this new feature. So you're going to have some form of UAT, whether unofficial or official, to make sure that the external clients are prepared for the changes that are coming down.
Jeremy Barrio, this has been absolutely fantastic. In a nutshell, UAT is important in Agile, just like it's been important in any other project, whether iterative, waterfall, RUP before?
Yeah, it's just as important. You just don't, like within Agile, you don't have to call an official sprint or an official part of a sprint UAT. It's just the level of involvement you have with the product owners or representative of the clients in the development of the changes or the fixing of certain issues. You have that knowledge and you have that communication and that feedback loop with those changes coming through. Then basically the clients are going to get what they want, and they're going to see, they're at least going to have that knowledge of what they're going to get before it goes out into production.
Jeremy, fantastic. Jeremy, people want to reach out, continue this conversation, disagree with you. Where might they be able to do that?
Well, there's a lot of people that disagree with me, but they can reach me through my blog, jbarria@wordpress.com. I believe it's called, and we have it called QA Corner. I believe the link will be on the release notes for our podcast. You can also reach me through LinkedIn or through Twitter @jbarrio, and we can continue the conversation there.
Super. And you're absolutely right. All of that will be in the show notes. So Jeremy, until next month and the next QA Corner, thank you again for participating.
You're welcome. It's been great.
Jon M Quigley, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be here.
Jon, I always enjoy your wonderful Alpha and Omega of Product Development column. Last time that we talked about onboarding, and you did a little foreshadowing in terms of thinking about onboarding and people within the overall system. Today, I think I'd like to explore system thinking and why that's important. Jon, can you start with, in your words, what is system thinking and why is it important?
System thinking, in my view, is looking at the entirety of, well, everything's a system, looking at the entirety of the system and making a decision based on the implications of the entire system and the outcome, not just the immediate need or the immediate part of the system. Everything is the system input, some transformational sort of things to produce some kind of output. And those transformational things can be a number of things. Input, process, output, goes to input, another process and output. And when we're talking about systems thinking, we're not talking about just looking at, here's an immediate problem. we need to solve, we're looking at here's an immediate problem, has a consequence way over there. If I take this decision, and if I take that decision, it has a consequence further down the system of this. So I'm thinking about the entire thing when I go to solve these issues.
Jon, interestingly enough, when we did our annual roundtable discussion where all of the voices from the software process and measurement cast got together, we ended up in a couple of different camps. There were people who were taking project and testing points of view. There were people that were taking project and software point of view. And you and Steve Tenton had more of a product view. Is a product view closer to a systems thinking point of view?
Well, I don't think it's closer, but it itself is the result of a number of system interactions, right? And the product itself probably fits within the context of another system, right? If I'm an embedded automotive designer, I develop a control unit for the brakes. I developed that control unit for the brakes in a system of people, hardware engineers, software engineers, people who grab the requirements, my marketing people, federal regulation, and all those things that influence what gets designed. And then ultimately the product goes on the vehicle, which now exists in a system with an engine, electronic control unit, a transmission controller, and some other things. So I think maybe you get a double bump of systems thinking in that case. But I think whether you're dealing with a product or a project, it's still systems should have some measure of systems thinking going on.
What's the difference? Why am I getting confused? What if you were to tease out something to educate me to say, okay, systems thinking, all these other things are constructs laid over the top is really what I'm gathering. How would you school me on that?
Here we go. A project is a system as well. A project is a system of interactions and a system of processes that produce the outcome. You have a process for developing the schedule. You have a process for monitoring the schedule and producing the results and getting feedback. And there's many exchanges along the way with people. So there's a system also involved in the project. Configuration management is a subsystem in your project management. Testing would be a subsystem, and how you go about performing the testing, how that works. For example, I think we talked about this before. Test engineers trying to test a product when they don't even know what it does and have a set of requirements. That's a difficult system to have to try and produce the outcome expected, right? The test guys, how do I test this? What do I test? What does failure look like? What does acceptable performance look like? And now we're burdening the product when we ask those specific questions, but that transition of what does it take to move from the development part to the test part, that's process related or project related.
At what point does the view get too large for individuals to really need to know? I mean, if everything is just a system within a system within a system, we could get to sort of music in the spheres at some point. At some point, don't we have to bound something to say, okay, this is enough for me to know?
Yeah, it's either that or prioritize what are the most important parts of the system that matter in the outcome, right? Because if we're talking about the project, not all interactions in the project can have negative consequences on the project, right? Or the outcome of the project. Not everything that can go wrong in the product development from a systems perspective will be a catastrophic failure for the product either. So you kind of have to prioritize which ones of those interactions, both at the project level, project kind of system level, or product development as a system, and the product itself as a system. What are the most important things? In the automotive world, we do things like design failure mode effects analysis, which prioritizes those negative consequences of the product itself. If this goes wrong, if it goes wrong, it's very unlikely to go wrong. And if it goes wrong, it has virtually no harmful impact. It's maybe a cosmetic blemish. So we're not going to pay much attention to this problem. So you have to find a way of prioritizing what parts of the system really need to have that systemic view and what parts don't. And then the other thing is, an individual product development got so complicated. that an individual knowing both the minutia and the system is not very practical or probable. And so from the product perspective, you many times, at least in the automotive world, you have people who do the minutia work, and you have people who do the systems work. They articulate the system as the system should work, and they're thinking in the long-term interactions. And the person doing the embedded detail work is operating in accordance with those defined systems interactions or expectations. So somebody's already setting the boundary for them.
Okay. Well, that then gets me to the question is, how do those two camps talk to each other?
Yeah, that's the thing. And that's the thing with the project as well. If we go back to our discussion of a project that is delivering some piece of software to the test group, but the test group has no requirements of what's in that software, how it works, right? So that's a missing connection between whoever wrote the specs and the people who are doing the testing, or the level of formalism with the specs.
Right.
So it all boils down to communication. I think that also came out in our roundtable at the end of last year. Communication and people interactions. That's part of the system as well. Why? And I don't know that there's a great solution for that. You just got to be aware and do what you can to make that right.
Well, I guess you have to build a system for that to happen also.
Yes. But you have to identify the players in that system, right? Mm-hmm. Again, we're back to what are the important attributes of this project, right? And who are the important players, and how should they be connected to the other? The systems group needs to be connected to the people who are doing the design group. And in the past, we had at the system level, the systems engineers would interview the embedded folks, so there'd be constant interaction between systems engineering and the embedded design people, so that we make sure that the spec was something that the embedded design people could actually build. All right. So you, as a project person, you facilitate those connections, or you identify those connections. These two need to talk, and then systems engineering embedded people need to talk, and test engineers and the spec writers need to talk, and and the project manager and the test people need to talk. So you have to identify those key communication linkages early on.
John, it's obvious that in complex scenarios, automotive, medical devices, things like that somebody has to have that systems view of the world. Is that same issue, that same system thinking point of view needed for a website or something smaller?
Yeah, probably less so. It probably doesn't hurt to have some of that systems thinking for, say, a website or a web-based game, because it probably I would think it would save you some time and some money of rework and learning the hard way. If you just take a few minutes and think about what are the consequences downstream if I do this, it's not going to hurt to take a few minutes to do that. But generally speaking, you're right. It's more important with the more complicated, the more costly for the mistake, right? Those things, you really need to have a systematic or systems approach. If I pull this string here today, what happens, 2 months from now, 6 months from now to my customer? That kind of thing. But if it's a web-based game and there's no great loss, easily fixed, then maybe it's not so crucial, so you can tailor the scope of this.
Well, I'm going to play devil's advocate on that one just for a second. If I'm in the business of doing web-based games and my entire system that I have to deal with, my product, ranges from capturing customers, marketing, packaging, adding in the in-app purchases and all of that stuff, that becomes fundamentally more complex than just someone sitting down and writing a whole bunch of, or even a whole bunch of just, writing a whole bunch of code to actually make the game run. So it is a fundamentally bigger and more complex picture. Making a change to the game might be easy, but if getting people to come back, if they didn't like it, that's pretty substantial.
Yeah, that is. And you have to weigh that out in your decision when you're thinking from a systems point of view. If you do not understand this whole concept of systems thinking and looking at what outcome is for your actions today, then you're never going to know whether that was a sufficient trade-off because you're essentially ignoring any systems kind of approach. But you have to think about the entire system and take the time to do that to understand whether I can take this approach or I should be more cavalier about how I do my work, right? I have the wherewithal to be more cavalier because there's no implication. But you don't know that until you've sat down and thought about it. It's part of that risk-reward equation where we have people say, I'm going to take the reward, but I'm really not going to know what the risk is.
Yeah, I'm not going to accept the risk myself.
Yeah. I'll pass it on to that guy who's going to have to work the overtime over Christmas to fix that problem.
Yeah, I did a few very late nights, I think I found at one point you could actually be awake for 130 hours before you started to hallucinate.
Wow.
Yeah, well, it was the time. I wished I wasn't in maintenance at that point. Jon, systems thinking, how important?
It's pretty important from an overarching perspective. You need somebody to be doing that. You obviously need people to get into the details, but you also need somebody that's able to see the entire forest, not just the tree, right?
And it's not just the work itself. It's not just the product, but it's other things like onboarding, and it impacts a wide variety of organizational roles.
Yeah, it's every process that goes into building the product is essentially a subsystem. The requirements gathering and articulation, that's a subsystem. The people who do the coding and producing and compiling, that's a subsystem, could be considered a subsystem.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who do the testing is a subsystem. And then the manufacturer launch of the product, there's some other subsystems. So how well that works together and how well you thought through the system implications of your decisions is going to impact how well the product gets launched and probably the quality of the product.
Yeah.
I can choose to, you know what, I need to save time. I'm going to omit testing. So the embedded guys are going to get a clean compile. They'll do a quick development test. They'll save it with a part number and they'll release it to manufacturing. And 90 days later, I'll find out I have an abomination on my hands.
Yeah. Good. Hopefully I'm not involved with that piece of product.
Yeah, me too. But, theoretically it can happen.
Oh, I think we've all seen things like that, whether it's hardware, whether it's combo of hardware and software, or if it's just software. I think sooner or later in anyone's career, one learns why having that systems thinking view or that big picture view becomes pretty important. Jon, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you for bringing your wonderful alpha and omega of product development to the Software Process and Measurement Cast. Jon, if people wanted to continue this conversation, how would they go about doing that?
Well, I can be reached on Twitter at Jon M Quigley, Quigley, and I can be reached on LinkedIn the same way, Jon M Quigley. You can reach me also at Value Transformation website, valuetransform.com. My email address is there, so you can shoot me an email, give me a call.
Absolutely. And all of that's in the show notes. Jon, thank you again.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
In Reread Saturday News, this week we wrap up our reread of Carol Dweck's Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. In the wrap-up, we discuss overall impressions of the book and suggest a set of exercises to reinforce your growth mindset. The next book in the series will be Holacracy, buy your copy today, by Brian J. Robertson. After my recent interview with Jeff Dalton on SPaMCAST 433, link in the show notes, I realized that I had only read extracts of Holacracy. Therefore, we will read the whole book together. Every week, we will discuss a chapter, then consider the implication of what we've read from the point of view of both someone pursuing an organizational transformation and using the material when coaching teams. And I still like the word transformation. Visit the Software Process and Measurement Cast blog at tcagley.wordpress.com to participate in this and previous rereads. In the next Software Process and Measurement Cast, we will feature our discussion with Stephen Adams on our recent reread of The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. Stephen is an active participant on the blog, especially during the rereads where he comments on almost every week. Stephen provides a lot of insight into the book and some ideas on how to get the most from our reread feature. I really enjoyed the conversation with Stephen, and I know that you'll enjoy the conversation too.